If somebody was trapped inside a burning aircraft by one of their limbs, those firefighters had to do amputations using some very basic hand tools to free the person from the wreckage and drag them clear.
It's very sentimental, but it's nice to see them and see them still all working. So they're quite good vehicles and they've served the time, just like me.
One of the greatest buzzes for us is to be standing inside the vehicle hall when a member of the public walks in for the first time. And I have to say, the first reaction is normally, wow. Many people don't realise that the military has its own fire service. And the RAF in particular still has military serving firefighters. Within the collection, we have the largest display of fire memorabilia in the country and probably the largest collection of not just military fire engines, we also have civilian fire engines as well. We get donated fire engines, we buy fire engines, and we go to scrapyards and rescue piles of junk that people wouldn't even recognise were a fire engine once upon a time. The RAF Fire Service can trace its roots back to 1922. That's when we were officially formed. The oldest RAF fire engine that we have in the collection is 1943. This vehicle is a very rare example of a War Office Type 1 fire appliance. Brought into production in 1943, one of only 3 survivors in the world. What makes it even more special is that it actually went to Normandy 6 days after D-Day. And for that very reason, it's painted in this special D-Day camouflage colour scheme. These vehicles were on every airfield where the RAF operated aircraft. And it was state-of-the-art in its time. But probably one of the most sobering things to look at is the guy who's actually dressed in a representation of a white asbestos suit. For every takeoff and landing, a fireman would be dressed in this asbestos suit. Takeoff and landing is the most dangerous time for any aircraft movement. And if an aircraft crashed, particularly in wartime, we weren't that bothered about saving the aircraft because we were producing aircraft in huge numbers. What we were interested in saving the trained people so that they could operate the aircraft. So the guy in the asbestos suit would literally have to save life by whatever means they could. And if somebody was trapped inside a burning aircraft by one of their limbs, it was recorded that those firefighters had to do amputations using some very basic hand tools to free the person from the wreckage and drag them clear. Because as brutal as it sounds, with the prosthetics that were available during the war, it was still possible to have a good quality of life and still return to operational duties. Douglas Bader being the classic example of somebody with an incredible disability who went on to become one of our most famous aces, rescued from a crashed aircraft. There are nearly 40 volunteers from a variety of backgrounds. We have a lot of ex-RAF firemen. In the Navy, they don't have dedicated firefighters, they're dual trade. So we've got aircraft handlers stroke firefighters. Regretfully at the moment, we don't have anybody ex-Army, but we also have people with no fire service background whatsoever. They just want to become involved.
It's a World War II Austin K4 60-foot turntable ladder. Most commonly used around London in the Blitz, which is what we're most famous for. There wasn't too many of them built, so less than 60 in service during that time. You have a crew of 5, you've got 3 in the back and 2 in the front. We've been restoring this over the last 4 to 5 years, and it's one of a unique few that are left in preservation. What we can see behind are 2 Mark 5s, 1952 onwards. One's in a poor state of restoration, it's fairly new to the museum, and the second one you can see is fairly well restored so far. The Mark 5 itself was one of the first vehicles designed for aircraft firefighting, specifically designed for crash rescue. They had a crew of 5, and obviously they went out to the crash sites. My dad was a Royal Air Force firefighter in the 1950s and National Service, as well as my Uncle Ivan. My dad died when I was 10 years old, so for me this keeps the memory alive.
The one to my left is a Dennis F series, and it's an F8, and the one to my right is a Dennis F12. They're both Admiralty machines, and they were the first fire engine to be built from the ground up as a limousine fire engine. A limousine being a completely enclosed body. So anything previous to that were like pre-war models where the fireman would sit on the outside with no protection from the elements at all. So when these type of appliances appeared on stations, it would have been an absolute luxury for the guys riding them. The F8 was one of a pair of vehicles that went to HM Dockyard in Trincomalee, now Sri Lanka, for protection of the dockyard there.
Dual purpose Mark I came into service in 1957. Well, all the memories flood back because we had them throughout the service, my service, both at Coningsby and Waddington and Finningley. They were one of the main vehicles during my career, along with the Alvis Mark VI. These were the backup trucks to feed the Mark VI on an airfield or an incident. It's very sentimental, but it's nice to see them and see them still all working. All my favourites and friends. They've served the time, just like me, and it's in better condition than I am.
The vehicle behind me is an Alvis Powerine Mark VI. I actually drove this in service at RAF Whitton in 1975. It's an all-terrain 6-wheel drive vehicle, and it was absolutely magic to drive. It was totally different to the previous generation of fire trucks, and it was quite exciting when firefighters saw this come off the line.
Traditionally in this country, all fire engines are red. It's something that everybody's familiar with. But within the museum, we've got fire engines of all sorts of various different colours. We have a blue fire engine, which was associated with the Queen's flight. We have another fire engine, which is day-glow green. It's almost a fluorescent colour, so you can't miss that driving down the road. But the one behind me is one that should be familiar to a lot of service personnel, and that's green with an orange stripe. It's known as the Green Goddess, and most of the time people would see them on the streets of this country during an industrial dispute or some sort of major disaster like a huge flooding. Towards the end, there were 3,500 Green Goddesses kept by the Home Office in store in case they were needed. 50 were kept at 24 hours readiness, 365 days a year. Sadly, the cost of storing 3,500 Green Goddesses was almost prohibitive. They were all auctioned off.
It's a massive undertaking when you take on a vehicle of this size and rarity to make a really, really nice original job of it. It's preserving the history of the fire service. It's also preserving engineering skills.
My main objective was to be able to drive this vehicle. Being as I am now 80 plus, and it's a little memory that lives with us.
My 2 sons, who are now in their 40s, actually came to see the vehicle at the museum, which was quite an emotional sort of moment.
It's always been part of my family, it's always been talked about. My children also do this. They're very proud of their granddad's heritage and my uncle. That's what it's all about for me.
The reason I do this is because I've had a job and a career that I've absolutely enjoyed and loved every minute of. One of the greatest buzzes for us is to be standing inside the vehicle hall when a member of the public walks in for the first time. And I have to say, the first reaction is normally, wow.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.